The letter arrived on the morning of my 18th birthday. Not from anyone I expected. Not from a relative, not a card from a distant cousin, not the automated bank notification I had been waiting for since I opened my first account at 16. It was a business envelope, cream-colored, with a return address I did not recognize, a law firm in a city 2 hours away that I had never heard of and had no reason to know. My name on the front in printed type. My address, Aunt Ruth's address, the only address I had ever had below it. And in the lower left corner, a notation that made my hands slow down before I even opened it. It read, to be delivered on the 18th birthday of Ren Halley, not before. I was standing at the kitchen counter in my pajamas. It was 7:45 in the morning. Aunt Ruth was already at work. She opened the bakery at 6, had done for as long as I could remember. The house was quiet with the specific quiet of a weekday morning, coffee maker still warm, the particular smell of a house that has been inhabited long enough to have its own identity. I held the envelope for a long time before I opened it. Because I understood, before I read a word of what was inside, that something had been waiting for this morning. That someone had planned for this specific day, my 18th birthday, not my 17th, not my 20th, this one, and had entrusted a sealed envelope to a law firm in a city 2 hours away with instructions to deliver it when I was legally an adult and not one day before. The only person who would have done that was my mother. She had been dead for 10 years. I sat down at the kitchen table. The birthday cake Aunt Ruth had made the night before was on the counter behind me, covered in plastic wrap, candles not yet lit. I did not look at it. I looked at the envelope. I opened it. Inside was a letter from the law firm, brief, professional, explaining that they had been retained by my mother 9 years earlier, with instructions to deliver the enclosed correspondence on my 18th birthday. The enclosed correspondence was a second envelope, smaller, handwritten. My name on the front in handwriting I recognized from birthday cards and grocery lists, and the small notes my mother used to leave in my lunchbox. My mother's handwriting. Written the year before she died, when I was 7 years old and she was 31, and she already knew what was coming even though she had not yet told me. I want to tell you what was in that letter, but before I do, I need to tell you who my mother was. Because the letter means nothing without the person who wrote it, and the person who wrote it deserves to be known before she becomes evidence. My mother's name was Cecily Halley. She was 32 years old when she died, and she had been alive on this earth for not nearly long enough, which is the truest thing I know how to say about her. She was a graphic designer who worked from home, which meant that for the first 8 years of my life she was simply present, in the next room, at the kitchen table with her drawing tablet, and her 3 different kinds of coffee cups that she rotated depending on her mood, available in the way that very few people in a child's life are actually available. She was small and quick and laughed easily, and had a habit of narrating whatever she was doing in a low voice when she was concentrating, as if the sound of her own reasoning helped it happen faster. She made very good soup. She read to me every night until I was old enough to insist on reading myself, and then she sat beside me while I read and pretended to be doing something else on her phone, and I always knew she was listening. She smelled like cedar and something floral that I have never been able to identify in any perfume or lotion since, which I have decided is simply the specific smell of her, and not anything that can be replicated. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in the winter I was 6. She did not tell me then I was 6, and the information was not mine to carry yet. She told me gradually, over the following year, in increments calibrated to what a 7-year-old could hold. First that she was sick, then that the doctors were helping her, then that the help was working slower than they hoped. She never told me she was dying, not in those words. What she said, toward the end, was, "I am going to be somewhere you can't see me for a while, but I will still be part of every day of your life. You will just have to learn to feel me differently." I was 7. I did not know what she meant. I thought she meant something spiritual. She meant something more practical than I understood. She meant the letter. She meant the law firm. She meant the sealed envelope with instructions, not before her 18th birthday. My mother knew, in her final year, that she was going to die before I was old enough to protect myself. She was a practical woman, artistic but precise, imaginative but grounded. She thought in systems. She asked the right questions. And in the year before she died, while managing her illness and raising me and saying goodbye to her life in the quiet ways that people do when they understand it is ending, she also made arrangements. She talked to a lawyer. She made a will. She established, with careful specificity, what she was leaving and to whom and when and under what conditions. She also, because she knew who was likely to be involved in my upbringing after she was gone, wrote the letter. She wrote it in October, 4 months before she died. I know this because the letter is dated. She wrote it at the kitchen table in our apartment, the apartment I would leave 8 days after her death and never return to, in the handwriting I recognized from birthday cards, in the specific voice of a woman who is writing to a version of her daughter she will never meet. The daughter who would be 18. The daughter who would be old enough to know. My mother trusted that I would be that daughter. She trusted it enough to plan for it. She just needed someone to hold the letter until the right morning. The law firm held it for 10 years. And on my 18th birthday, at 7:45 in the morning, while Aunt Ruth was at the bakery, and the birthday cake was on the counter, and the coffee maker was still warm, it arrived. My mother died on a Wednesday in April. I was 8 years old, just barely 8. My birthday was in March. And the particular sequence of that week is something I have carried so long that it has become less a memory and more a landscape. Something I move through rather than something I observe. She died at home. This was her choice. She had been very clear about it, and the people around her had honored it. Our apartment, the one she had chosen because it had good morning light in the kitchen and a small balcony where she kept plants that I was allowed to water, was where she wanted to be. I was with her. I want to say that. I was there in the room on the bed beside her because she had asked me to be, and because at 8 years old I did not fully understand what I was witnessing, and so I was simply present for it in the way that children are present for things, completely, without the protective distance that adults learn to maintain. Aunt Ruth was there too. My mother's older sister by 4 years, Ruth Hallie. She had kept her maiden name after a brief marriage that ended before I was born. She had driven 4 hours from her home to be with us in those final weeks. She slept on our couch. She made sure there was food. She held my mother's hand in the nights when the pain was worse, and she held mine on the Wednesday morning when my mother's breathing changed and then stopped. She was the one who told me. She sat me down in the kitchen, the same kitchen where the coffee maker was always on, where my mother had worked at her drawing tablet, where I had eaten 1,000 breakfasts. And she looked me in the eye and told me in the direct, clear way that I later understood was the best possible way to tell a child something enormous. She said, "Your mom is gone, sweetheart. She died this morning. And it is the saddest thing. And you are going to feel a lot of things, and all of them are okay." I said, "Will I see her again?" She said, "Not the way you're used to seeing her, but she will be with you, in ways you'll understand when you're older." She meant that the way adults mean things when they are trying to give comfort, obliquely, reaching for something true that they cannot quite fully say. She did not mean it the way my mother meant it. My mother meant something specific. Aunt Ruth took me home with her the following week. There was no discussion of alternatives. There was no other family. My father had not been in the picture since before I could remember. My mother's parents were both gone. Ruth was it. She packed up what was essential from the apartment, put the rest in storage, and drove me 4 hours to her house in Carver, which was a small city with a good elementary school and a bakery on the main street that she had been running for 6 years. I did not know, in that car, what my life was going to look like. I was 8, and I had just watched my mother die, and I was sitting in the passenger seat with my backpack on my lap, and my mother's old cardigan folded on top of the backpack because it still smelled like her. I did not know that Ruth had been to a lawyer's office 3 days after my mother's funeral. I did not know what she had learned there. I did not know what she had decided to do with what she learned. I would not know any of it for 10 years. I want to tell you what life with Aunt Ruth was actually like, because this story requires honesty in both directions, and the honest truth is that she was not a monster. She was a woman who did a complicated thing, and she was also a woman who showed up. The house in Carver was a 2-bedroom craftsman on a street with big trees that went orange in October and made the whole neighborhood look like a painting for about 3 weeks every year. Aunt Ruth's bedroom was at the front. She gave me the back bedroom, the one with the window that overlooked the yard, the one she had been using as a studio for the watercolor painting she did on Sunday mornings when the bakery was closed. She moved her painting supplies to the basement without being asked and without making it a point. She just did it. She converted the room, put in a proper bed, bought a desk, found a bookshelf at the second-hand shop on Church Street, and filled it with the kind of books she thought a child might like. She had never had children. She was doing her best from a standing start. She was good at the practical things. The house was clean. The food was real. She was a baker by profession and brought her precision to everything she cooked. The school she enrolled me in was the right one for my temperament, something she had researched before I arrived. There were clean clothes in my size in the closet on the first morning, which she had bought the week before based on sizes she found in my records. She had thought about me before I arrived. That mattered. She was less good at the emotional things, not because she didn't feel them. I believe she felt them enormously and had very little practice with enormity. She was contained in the way of people who have managed difficult things alone for a long time and have learned to process internally. She was not cold. She was sealed, and a grieving 8-year-old needed something more porous than sealed. She tried. I want to give her that completely, she tried. She sat at the edge of my bed when the nightmares came. She drove me to the therapist my school recommended without complaint, every Thursday afternoon for 2 years, waiting in the parking lot with a book. She came to every school event. She learned which foods I wouldn't eat and stopped making them. She learned that I needed quiet in the mornings before I was ready to talk, and she gave me that quiet without requiring explanation. She loved me. I have never doubted that. Even now, after everything, I do not doubt that. What I doubt is whether love was sufficient reason to do what she did. What I have concluded, after the year it took me to reach a conclusion, is that it was not. Love is not a sufficient reason. It is a reason, and it was real, and it does not change the arithmetic of what happened. But I want you to hold both things, because both things are true, and because a story that makes her simply villainous would be a simpler story than the actual one. The first time the subject of my mother's estate came up, I was 12. I was in the kitchen doing homework and Ruth was at the counter paying bills. She paid bills by hand, in a ledger, with a specific pen she kept in the drawer by the stove. She was working through a column of numbers and she said, without looking up, "I spoke to the estate attorney today, about your mother's accounts." I said, "What accounts?" She paused, a brief pause, the pause of someone recalibrating. Then she said, "She had a small savings account. It's been folded into the household, to cover your expenses." I said, "How much was in it?" She said, "Not a lot, enough to help for a while." She went back to her ledger. I went back to my homework. I filed the exchange away as information without weight. My mother had a small savings account. Aunt Ruth had used it for household expenses. This seemed reasonable. Children do not audit the finances of the adults who raise them. They receive the story they are given. I received the story. I was 12. I believed her. The 10 years between my mother's death and my 18th birthday had the texture that years of that kind always have, which is the texture of a life that is entirely real while it is being lived, and which becomes, in retrospect, the period before the thing you didn't know was coming. I was not unhappy. I want to say that clearly. I was a child who had lost her mother and was being raised by an aunt who loved her imperfectly and consistently, and within those parameters I built a life. I made friends. I was good in school, not exceptional, not the kind of academic performance that announces itself, but steady and curious and genuinely interested in things, which my mother had been and which I carried forward as her most identifiable inheritance. I worked at the bakery on weekends from the time I was 15, not because Aunt Ruth required it, because I wanted to. There is something clarifying about physical work with a clear outcome. You make a thing. The thing exists. It is either right or it isn't, and if it isn't, you understand why, and next time it is. I liked that. It suited the part of my brain that needed problems with solutions. Aunt Ruth and I had found, by the time I was 15, a functional rhythm. Not warmth exactly. Warmth had never been fully available between us, not in the way my mother's house had been warm, but comfort. The comfort of two people who have lived together long enough to know each other's patterns and have stopped fighting them. She still went to watercolor on Sunday mornings. She had moved her supplies back up from the basement years ago, into the back bedroom that had become her studio again after I grew old enough to take care of myself in the mornings. She never offered to show me the paintings. I never asked. There was a privacy to her creative life that I respected the way I respected her sealed quality generally. The subject of my mother came up occasionally. Not often, it was not the kind of house where the past was discussed freely, but occasionally when something prompted it. A photograph, an anniversary. Once, when I was 16, I found my mother's drawing tablet in a box in the basement and brought it upstairs and asked if it still worked. Aunt Ruth looked at it for a long time. Then she said, "Your mother was very talented." I said, "I know." She said she worked hard at everything. She was always like that, even as a kid. It was the most she had said about my mother in years. I stored it carefully, the way I stored everything she gave me about the woman I was trying to reconstruct from available materials. I had photographs. I had the cardigan that still lived in my closet. I had specific memories: the kitchen, the narrating, the soup, the lunchbox notes. I had the birthday cards she had made me, the ones she had designed herself because she was a designer, hand-lettered and illustrated, 7 of them, one for each birthday she had been alive for. And I had the knowledge, confirmed again at 12 and not revisited since, that she had left a small savings account that Aunt Ruth had absorbed into the household. I had no reason to believe there was more. My mother had been a freelance designer. Her income had been comfortable but not extravagant. The apartment she had rented was nice but not expensive. She did not have the profile, as I understood it, of a person who left a substantial estate. I had no reason to question the story I had been given. The story was, she left a little, Ruth used it, there was nothing else. Then my 18th birthday arrived, and the letter arrived with it. Before I tell you what was in the letter, I need to pause. Because I have been carrying what I am about to tell you since I was 18 years old, and for most of that time, I carried it alone. And one of the things I have learned from carrying it is that the people who most need to hear it are the people who are right now in the middle of a story they don't fully understand yet, who are receiving a version of events from someone they love and trusting it because love is supposed to be trustworthy. If that is you, if you are in the middle of a story where something doesn't quite add up, I want you to hear this all the way to the end before you decide what to do with it. Tell me in the comments, has someone ever loved you and also kept something from you that was yours to know? Drop your city and the time it is. I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed to Signed and Silent yet, please do. New story every week. The bell is right there. Now let me tell you what my mother wrote. The letter was 4 pages, handwritten, front and back of 2 sheets of her design paper. The good paper, heavy and cream-colored. The kind she kept in the flat drawer of her desk for projects that deserved it. She wrote it in October, 4 months before she died. She was 31 years old and she was dying, and she sat down at the kitchen table in the apartment where we had lived together for 8 years, and she wrote to the daughter she would not see become an adult. I am going to tell you what she wrote. Not every word, the full letter is mine and will stay mine. But what I am going to tell you is the shape of it, because the shape of it is the story. She started by saying, "Ren, if you are reading this then you are 18 and it is your birthday and I am so sorry I am not there. I have been sorry about that every day since October. I am sorry every day that I will miss." She said, "I want you to know that I chose this morning for the letter deliberately. Not your 16th, not your 21st. 18. Because 18 is when you are legally an adult and legally able to know things and legally able to act on them. I needed you to be all of those things before this letter found you." She said, "I need to tell you about what I left you, and I need to tell you about Ruth." She said, "Your Aunt Ruth loves you. I want you to hold that first and keep holding it while you read the rest. She loves you. She is not a bad person. She is a person who, I believe, is capable of making a decision that is wrong and also motivated by something real. I know her. I know how she thinks. And I know that the situation I am leaving behind is one she may find difficult to navigate correctly. This letter is my attempt to navigate it for her, or around her, depending on what she has done. She said, I have a will. It has been filed with the law firm that delivered this letter. A copy is enclosed. In that will I left everything to you. Not to Ruth, not to any relative, not to anyone else. To you, in a trust managed by the law firm until your 18th birthday, at which point the trust dissolves and everything in it becomes yours directly. She said, the trust contains the following. The savings account I have been building since you were born. I started it the year I found out I was pregnant, because I was a single mother and I understood from the beginning that the preparation had to be mine to make. The current balance is just over $90,000. There is also a property, the cottage on Marin Lake that Grandma left to me when she died. You visited it once when you were 4. It is a small building on a large piece of land, and the land has been increasing in value for years, and I believe by the time you read this it will be worth considerably more than it is today. Both of these things are yours. They were always going to be yours. Said, I also left a letter for Ruth. The law firm delivered it to her the week after my funeral. She knows about the trust. She knows it exists. She knows it becomes yours at 18. What she has done with that knowledge in the years between my death and your birthday that I do not know, I hope she has told you. I hope she has honored the spirit of what I set up. But I know Ruth, and I know the particular way that financial pressure can bend people who are otherwise good, and so I left this letter. Just in case. She said, if she has told you and everything is as it should be, then this letter is simply a love letter from your mother on your 18th birthday. If she has not, if the trust is the first you are hearing of any of this, then I want you to know that what exists is yours, that the law firm is already acting on your behalf, and that you have options. She said, you are allowed to be angry. You are allowed to be confused. You are allowed to feel whatever you feel about Ruth, whatever that is, because feelings do not require justification, and yours have been building for 10 years without your knowing what they were actually about. She said, and I want you to know that I thought about this. I want you to know that I did not leave you unprepared. I could not stay. I tried everything I could try to stay and I could not, but I could do this. I could sit down at this table in October and write to the 18-year-old you and tell you, I saw you coming. I planned for you. The cottage is yours. The money is yours. And when you stand on the porch of that cottage for the first time as an adult, I need you to know that I put it there. She said, you are my greatest work, not the design projects, not anything else. You. She said, happy birthday, Ren. I read the letter once. Then I read it again. Then I put it face down on the kitchen table, and I sat very still for a long time while the coffee maker clicked off, and the birthday cake sat behind me with its unlit candles, and the October morning outside the window went on without particular awareness of what was happening inside. My mother had known she was dying. She had spent a year making sure I would not be unprotected. She had told a law firm to wait 10 years and then deliver her words to her daughter on the right morning. She had left me $90,000 and a cottage. She had also left a letter for Ruth. Ruth had known since the week after the funeral. I want to tell you what I found, and then I want to tell you what I did not find, because both matter. The law firm's letter included a contact name, a partner named James Whitlow who had managed the trust for 10 years. I called him at 9 o'clock that same morning, from the kitchen table, with my mother's letter in my hand. He was expecting my call. He said, Miss Hallie, happy birthday. I have been waiting to speak with you for 10 years. He told me the trust was intact. This was the first thing, and I did not fully absorb its significance until he said, your aunt did not attempt to access the trust. The principal and all accrued interest are exactly as they should be. I said, she didn't touch it. He said, the trust is an irrevocable structure. She could not have accessed it without your consent and significant legal effort. It was designed that way specifically. But no, she made no attempt to challenge or access the trust assets. The $90,000 plus interest currently stands at just over $114,000. I sat with that. She had not taken the money. He continued. The cottage on Marin Lake was a different matter. The property had been held in the trust as well, titled in the trust's name, not in Ruth's. She had no legal access to it. However, she had been paying the property taxes on it for 10 years from the household account. He said, "Your aunt has been maintaining the property. She has also had it rented through a local property management company since you were 11 years old. The rental income has been going into a separate holding account managed by our firm, as per your mother's instructions. That account currently holds just over $38,000. I said, she knew she was renting a property that wasn't hers. James Whitlow paused in the way of attorneys when a question requires care. He said, "Your aunt was named as a limited estate administrator with specific authority to manage the property's maintenance and tax payments. The rental arrangement was something she established unilaterally, beyond the scope of what she was authorized to do, but the rental income was correctly directed to the holding account, not to her personally. I have been monitoring the situation." I said, "She never told me any of this." He said, "No, she did not." I said, "Was she supposed to?" He said, "Your mother's letter to her was explicit. She was asked, not legally required, but explicitly asked, to tell you about the trust when you were old enough to understand it. Your mother suggested 16 as a reasonable age. She was given discretion on timing with the understanding that you would know before you turned 18, as the trust terms would be active regardless." He said, "I sent Ruth a reminder letter when you turned 16. I received no response." I said, "Why didn't you contact me directly?" He said, "I was not authorized to contact you directly until your 18th birthday. Your mother was very specific about that. She did not want you to have this information before you were legally an adult. Regardless of what Ruth did or didn't do, she wanted you to have the full picture only when you could fully act on it." I set my phone on the kitchen table. My mother had built a structure that protected me even from the failure of the people inside it. She had anticipated that Ruth might not tell me. She had not left my protection entirely dependent on Ruth's choices. She had put the law firm between us as a failsafe. But she had also left Ruth a letter. She had asked Ruth, explicitly, to be honest with me when I was old enough. Ruth had read that letter. She had known about the trust for 10 years. She had maintained the property. She had not touched the money. She had also not said a single word to me. Not at 12, when the subject of the estate came up at the kitchen counter. Not at 16, when James Whitlow sent his reminder. Not on any of the 10,000 ordinary days in between. She had held the secret with both hands and kept it. And I needed to understand why. Aunt Ruth came home from the bakery at 4 o'clock. I had spent the day doing several things. I had spoken to James Whitlow for an hour. I had read my mother's letter 4 more times. I had eaten, at some point, the birthday cake off the counter, a single slice, standing up, which is not the way one is supposed to eat birthday cake but seemed correct for the day I was having. I had cried twice, once at the kitchen table early in the morning and once in the back bedroom, the room that used to be her studio, where I had lived for 10 years in a space she had cleared for me and which was, I now understood, one of many things she had given me alongside one very large thing she had not. She came in the back door, the one from the garage, in her bakery clothes with flour still on her forearm the way she always had after a long shift. She saw me at the kitchen table. She saw the letter. She saw my face. She stopped. She said, "It came." I said, "Yes." She put down her bag. She took off her jacket. She hung it on the hook by the door, the specific routine of a woman doing the known things while navigating the unknown thing in front of her. Then she sat down across from me at the kitchen table. She said, "I've been waiting for this day for 10 years. I said, "Have you?" She said, "I want to explain." I said, "Please." She said, "When your mother died," she stopped. She looked at the table for a moment. "When Cecily died, I went to the attorney that week. They showed me the will, the trust, the cottage, the money, all of it. And I sat in that office and I was so angry at her." I said, "Angry at Mom?" She said, "At how much she had, how much she had been building quietly without ever saying. She never told me about the savings account. She never told me about the cottage. I knew Grandma had left it to her, but I didn't know she'd held on to it. I thought she'd sold it years ago. And she had this whole structure, this plan, this careful constructed plan for your future. And I thought, she never thought to tell me. She never asked if I needed anything. We were sisters, and she never once said, "Ruth, I have this. Is there anything you need?" She stopped. I said, "She left you nothing." She said, "She left me nothing. She left everything to you," which was right. I understood that. But she didn't leave me. She didn't acknowledge. She stopped again. She said, "I know how this sounds." I said, "Keep going." She said, "I took you in. I gave up the studio. I paid for everything for 10 years. And she had money, she had property, and I was managing. I was fine. I don't want to overstate it. I was fine. But I was doing it alone, and she had this structure in place that was yours and not mine, and I felt left out of my own sister's planning." I said, "So you didn't tell me?" She looked at me directly. She said, "I told myself I was protecting you, waiting until you could really understand it. I told myself 16 was too soon, that I'd tell you at 17, and then 17 came, and I told myself I'd tell you closer to your birthday. And then I kept not telling you." She said, "I know that is not a good reason. I know there is not a good reason." I said, "You paid the property taxes." She said, "Yes." I said, "You had the cottage rented." She said, "Yes. The rent went into the trust account. I never took it." I said, "I know." She said, "I want you to know that. I never took the money. The trust account, the rental income, none of it. I was authorized to pay the taxes, and I paid the taxes. Everything else I put where it was supposed to go." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because it was yours. It was always yours. I knew that. I needed to keep it quietly. I needed to be the one managing it for a while longer. I don't know how to explain it better than that." I sat with her for a long time without saying anything. The kitchen was quiet. The bakery smell that she always brought home with her was in the room. The photograph of my mother on the counter, the one Ruth had put there years ago, a small framed picture from some family gathering before I was born, was in its usual place. I said, "Did she know you might do this? Not tell me?" Ruth said she left me a letter. It was very Cecily, very her, very kind and very direct at the same time. She said she understood I might find the situation complicated. She said she trusted me to do right by you. She said she loved me. She said, I don't think she was surprised. I think she planned for the possibility and decided to love me anyway and let the law firm be the fail-safe. I said, that sounds like her. She said, yes. We sat for a while longer. Then I said, I'm not going to tell you this is okay. It isn't fully okay. I spent 10 years being told there was nothing and there was something, and that matters. She said, I know. I said, I also know you raised me. You showed up in a week when you didn't have to. You gave me the room. You drove me to therapy for 2 years. You came to everything. She said, I wanted to. I said, I know you did. I said, both things are true. You loved me, and you kept something from me that was mine to know. And I am going to need time to figure out what that means for us. She said, I know. She said, I'm sorry, Ren. I'm sorry about all of it. She sounded like she meant it. She sounded like a woman who had been carrying the weight of a decision for 10 years and had finally put it down and found that putting it down felt worse than holding it, which is the specific punishment of a long-kept secret. The carrying hurts, but the moment of not carrying it hurts more, because then you have to see what the carrying cost. I stood up. I went to the back bedroom. I sat on the bed where I had slept for 10 years, and I looked at the window and the yard and the trees that went orange in October. I let myself feel everything. It took a while. James Whitlow handled the trust transfer with efficient precision. The $114,000 moved into an account in my name within 30 days. The cottage on Marin Lake was red-idled in my name. The rental income holding account was transferred. The entire structure my mother had built, 10 years of waiting, became mine in the span of a month. I drove to Marin like 3 weeks after my birthday. It is a 2-hour drive on roads that start as highway and become county routes, and then become, in the final 20 minutes, a narrow road through second-growth forest that opens suddenly into a clearing where the lake sits flat and dark and wide under the November sky. The cottage is at the end of a gravel path, small, single-story, built in the 1960s by my grandmother's family, maintained imperfectly over decades, and then, for the last 7 years, maintained by a property management company that had kept it rented to seasonal tenants. It was empty when I arrived. The current tenants had ended their lease in September. The key was in the lockbox. I let myself in. It smelled like old wood and lake air and something faintly familiar that I could not immediately place. I walked through the rooms, the main room with the stone fireplace, the small kitchen, the 2 bedrooms, the bathroom with the clawfoot tub that was somehow still in good shape. I walked out through the back door onto the porch that faced the lake. The lake was November, still, silver and flat, the trees around it stripped to their bare structures by the season. A dock extended out from the property line, wood, weathered, solid. I sat down on the porch step. I thought about my mother at 31, making her plans, sitting at the kitchen table with her design paper and her pen, writing to the person I would become, trusting a law firm to hold the letter, trusting the structure to hold. I thought about the morning she told me she was going somewhere I couldn't see her. I thought about her saying, "You will feel me differently." I thought she meant this. She meant this specific place. She meant the key in the lockbox and the porch step and the November lake. She meant, I will be here, in the thing I built for you, waiting for the right morning. I sat on the porch step, and I let myself cry in a way I had not let myself cry since I was 8 years old, which is not the recommended interval between cries, but was the actual one. 10 years of grief that had been living underneath the story of nothing, and which now had a place to land. My mother had not left nothing. She had left everything she had, and she had put it exactly where I could find it. I sat on the porch until the light went, and the lake turned from silver to dark, and the first stars came out over the water. Then I went inside, and I called Aunt Ruth. I said, "I'm at the cottage." She said, "I know, I figured." I said, she would have loved this place. Ruth's voice when she answered was smaller than usual. She said, "She did love it. She used to talk about bringing you here. She was very excited to show it to you when you were old enough." I said, "She showed it to me at 4. Ruth said, "She told you that?" I said, "She wrote it in the letter. She said I visited once when I was 4 and that she hoped I would remember it." A pause, then, "Do you?" I thought about it. I thought about whether there was anything in my memory that corresponded to a lake and a cottage and a porch and a small version of myself looking at water. I said, "I think so. I think I remember the smell." Ruth said, "She used to say it smelled like home." I said, "Yes." We stayed on the phone for a while without saying much. The cottage was quiet around me. The lake was dark outside the window. Eventually, I said, "I'm going to sleep here tonight." Ruth said, "The management company left linens." I said, "I know." She said, "Ren." I said, "Yeah." She said, "I'm glad it went to you. I want you to know that. Whatever I did, whatever I kept, I'm glad it went to you. It was always supposed to." I said, "I know, Ruth." I said, "Get some sleep." I hung up. I found the linens. I made the bed. I lay down in the cottage my mother had left me, and I listened to the November lake outside, and I let myself be there, in the place she had kept for me for the first time. It has been 2 years since the morning the letter arrived. I am 20 years old. I am studying design, graphic design, the same field my mother worked in, which is something that surprises me every time I say it out loud because I did not choose it consciously. I chose it because it suits my brain, the way her brain suited it. The way certain things pass between people whether or not they are present to pass them. The cottage is mine. I have been there 4 times since the first November visit. Once in winter, once in early spring when the ice was still on the lake, and the porch needed a board replaced that I replaced myself with help from a neighbor down the road who knew what he was doing. Once in summer, for a week, with 2 friends who had never seen a lake and who spent 3 days adjusting to the specific quality of quiet that a place far from the city generates. Once in the fall, alone, to sit on the porch and watch the trees do what they do in October, and think about my mother choosing this place and holding it. The money is in an account I have not spent carelessly. Some of it went to my first year's tuition, an amount that made the loans I had been preparing for unnecessary, which felt like the most specific gift my mother could have given a design student, which is to say, time. The gift of not having to work 20 hours a week to stay afloat. The gift of choosing the project over the paycheck, at least for now. Aunt Ruth and I have found our way to something. Not the same something we had before. That was built on a story that was not entirely true, and you cannot go back to a structure once you have seen its foundation clearly. But something new, something that accounts for what happened and holds it without pretending it away. She told me once that she had rehearsed explaining the trust to me roughly 200 times in 10 years. Different versions, different ages, different circumstances. She said she had always found a reason to wait longer. She said the closer it got to 18, the more impossible it felt, because by then the not telling had such long roots that telling felt like excavating everything at once. I said, that's not an excuse. She said, I know, I'm not offering it as one. I'm just telling you what it was like from inside it. I said, I believe you. She said, I know you do. That might be the thing I am least able to forgive myself for, that you believe me. I thought about that for a long time. My mother wrote that Ruth loves me. She wrote it before she knew what Ruth would do or not do. She wrote it as a fact independent of Ruth's choices, because she knew that love and choices are not the same thing and can coexist in complicated ways, and she wanted me to know the love was real before I found out about the choice. She was right, the love is real, the choice was wrong, I hold both. I keep my mother's letter in a cedar box in my apartment. The specific smell of the cedar reminded me, from the first time I put the letter inside, of something I had been trying to name for 20 years. My mother's smell. Cedar and something floral. I had been living without it for 20 years, and I found it by accident in a box I bought at a market stall because the grain of the wood was beautiful. I opened the box the first time and stood in my kitchen and understood, in the wordless way of things that are older than language, that she had been here all along. In the grain of the wood, in the handwriting on the design paper, in the porch step at Marin Lake. She said, I will still be part of every day of your life. She said, you will just have to learn to feel me differently. I am still learning. I think I will be learning for the rest of my life. I think she knew that too, and planned for it, and left me exactly enough to keep learning without running out. That is who she was. That is the story she left me. My mother was 31 years old when she sat down at the kitchen table in October and wrote a letter to the 18-year-old I would become. 31 is not old. I understand that more clearly now than I did when I was 8, when 31 seemed like a fully arrived age, the age of people who had everything sorted. Now that I am 20, I can see that 31 is still close enough to the beginning to be frightened by it, still early enough in the architecture of a life that the plans feel fragile and the future feels uncertain. She was not certain. She was frightened and she was sick and she was losing the life she had built and the daughter she had made. And in the middle of all of that, she sat down and she wrote 4 pages of handwriting on good paper, and she gave it to a law firm with instructions to wait. She was 31, and she was scared, and she planned for everything anyway. I think about that when things feel too large for me, when the future feels uncertain in the way futures feel uncertain at 20, which is frequently. I think about a woman at a kitchen table in October, not old enough by any measure to be dying, making sure that the person she would leave behind would have ground to stand on. She could not give me more years. She gave me everything else she had. If you are listening to this, and you are carrying a loss, the specific loss of a parent who left too early, who you only got to know partially, whose full shape you are still assembling from available materials, I want you to hear this. They thought about you. Whatever they were able to do or not do, whatever they left or did not leave, they thought about you. They were human and they were imperfect and they were trying in whatever way they could manage. And sometimes the trying arrives on your 18th birthday in a cream-colored envelope from a law firm 2 hours away, and it smells like cedar, and it has your name on the front in handwriting you would know anywhere. Sometimes the protection was always there. You just had to be old enough to hold it. That is my story. That is my mother. If it reached you, share it with someone who needs it. Subscribe to Signed and Silent if you haven't. New story every week. I will see you in the next one. I want to pause on something before I go further, because the story I am telling has a shape that could mislead if I am not careful. It would be easy to read what I have told you and conclude that the 10 years with Aunt Ruth were defined by the things she withheld. They were not. The thing she withheld was real and significant, and I am not going to minimize it. But 10 years is a long time, and long times contain many things, and the thing withheld was not the whole texture of it. I want to tell you about the watercolors. When I was 14, Aunt Ruth started letting me come into the studio on Sunday mornings. Not invited, she did not make a formal offer. She just stopped closing the door all the way. And one Sunday I pushed it open and looked in, and she was at the table with her brushes and her water jars, and she looked up and she said, "Sit anywhere." I sat in the chair by the window. I watched her work. She was good, not professionally accomplished. She had never pursued it seriously, but genuinely good, in the way of someone whose eye understands things before her hand can always follow. She painted the yard outside her window. She painted the bakery counter at 7 in the morning before it opened. She painted my mother once, from memory and a photograph, a small painting on a piece of card, and when she finished, she put it in a frame and she gave it to me without explanation. I still have it. It hangs in my apartment now, above my desk. She painted my mother the way she remembered her, younger than in the photographs I had, maybe mid-20s, at some gathering I couldn't identify, laughing at something outside the frame. The same energy as the woman I was always trying to reconstruct from available materials. Ruth had her. She had an image of her that I didn't have. She put it on a piece of card and she gave it to me and she never made a thing of it. That is the complication. That is why I said she is not a villain. A villain does not paint your dead mother from memory and give you the painting on a Tuesday without explanation. A person who loves you and also fails you does that. And that is what she was. A person who loved me and also failed me. I have been learning to hold both. It is ongoing work. I also want to tell you about the morning of my 16th birthday, 2 years before the letter, 2 years after James, Whitlow sent his reminder letter that she did not answer. She made me a cake. She always made the cake. It was her specific gift, the one thing she would not hand off to the bakery, and she put it on the kitchen table, and she sat across from me while I had my coffee, and she said, "I have been thinking about what you will do after high school." I said, "College, probably." She said, "I want to help with that." I said, "You don't have to." She said, "I want to. I have been putting money aside." I said, "Ruth." She said, "Let me, it matters to me." She had been putting money aside. Her own money from the bakery, from a decade of small business ownership that was comfortable but not abundant. She had been saving it for me, alongside the trust she was not telling me about, alongside the money that was already mine. I do not know what to make of that. I have turned it over many times and I still do not have a clean interpretation. Was it guilt made into action? Was it genuine love operating independently of the secret? Was it both, which is probably the truest answer? Both, it was probably both. People are both. She gave me $11,000 for my first year of college. Money she had saved herself. Money she did not have to give. Money given alongside a secret she was not ready to tell. Both things, always both. I have told you the content of my mother's letter. I want to tell you the feel of it, because the feel of it is something I have carried separately from the facts. She wrote to me the way she talked to me when I was small, not the voice of a parent performing patience, the actual voice of a person who found their child genuinely interesting and was speaking to them as such. She asked me questions in the letter, not rhetorical ones, Real ones. What do you love? What are you working on? Who are your people? She wrote, I don't know who you will have become by the time you read this. I know who you were at 8, curious and quiet and very precise about things that mattered to you and completely chaotic about things that didn't. I hope some of that is still true. I hope the precision stayed. I hope the chaos stayed too. She wrote about herself. She told me things about her own life that she had not had time to tell me before she died. That she had almost not moved to the city where she eventually made her life. That she had spent a year in her mid-20s working at a restaurant in a city she didn't love before she figured out what she was supposed to be doing. That my father, she did not use his name, she said. Your father, briefly, which is all I will say because he is not this story's subject, had been someone she chose and then unchose, and that this had taught her things about the difference between people who fit your life and people who fit a moment. She wrote, I have tried to fit my whole life. I am sorry I did not get more of it. She wrote about death in the specific way of a person who has had to make peace with something she did not choose. She said, I am not afraid of where I am going. I am afraid of what I will miss. Those are different fears, and it took me a while to separate them. She said, the missing is the grief. The going is just going. I read that sentence many times. I read it at 18, and I have read it since, and it means something new each time, which I believe was intentional. She was a designer. She understood that the best things have multiple layers visible at different distances. She was talking about herself dying. She was also, I think, talking to me about grief, about the difference between missing her and fearing the loss itself. She was trying to teach me something while she still could about how to carry what was coming. She was 31. She was writing at a kitchen table in October. She was trying to teach her daughter how to grieve. I think about that every time I sit down to write something that matters. The specific discipline of trying to give someone something useful while you still can. She was my mother, and she was 31, and she was the most deliberate person I have ever encountered. I want to tell you about the project I made in my second semester of school, because it belongs to this story, even though it came at the end of it. It was an independent study project, open brief, make something that matters to you. The most terrifying kind of assignment, which is to say the most useful kind. I made a small book. Handmade, letterpress printed on the good heavy paper, hand-bound with an exposed stitch binding that my bookbinding professor taught me in a 2-hour Saturday session because I asked. 12 pages, design and text together, the way my mother worked. It was about her. Not a memorial. I was not interested in making something sad. It was about how she thought, about the systems she built, about the specific way she planned for a future she would not see, with the precision of a designer who understood that the work outlasts the hand that makes it. I used her letter. Excerpts with a design structure around them, not to display them publicly, but to sit with them in a form I made, to build something the way she built things, with intention and care and the specific materials at hand. On the last page, I put the photograph Ruth painted, my mother laughing at something outside the frame, young, specific, present. I gave a copy to Ruth. She sat with it for a long time. She did not say much. When she looked up, she had the expression of a person who has received something they did not expect to deserve and are not sure what to do with that. She said, "This is beautiful, Wren." I said she would have liked the binding. Ruth said she would have critiqued the margins. I almost laughed. It was the most accurate thing Ruth had ever said about my mother. I said, yes, she would have. We sat with the small book between us on the kitchen table. The same kitchen table where 10 years earlier the flour-dusted woman had told the 8-year-old girl that her mother was gone, and what that meant, and that all the feelings were okay. The feelings had been okay. Some of them had taken a long time to become okay. But here we were on the other side of them, in the same kitchen, with a handmade book and a painting, and the specific complicated warmth of two people who have hurt each other and kept showing up anyway. I believe my mother would have found that acceptable. I believe she planned for it. I am 20 years old, and I know things I did not know at 8 or 12 or 16 or even 18. I know that my mother was not only the woman I remember from 8 years of morning breakfasts and lunchbox notes and bedtime reading. She was also a woman who sat alone at a table in October knowing she was dying and did not fall apart, who made lists and called lawyers and wrote 4 pages of careful handwriting because she understood that love without structure is just feeling, and feeling does not hold up in a county recorder's office. I know that Aunt Ruth is not only the woman who kept a secret for 10 years. She is also the woman who moved her watercolor supplies to the basement without being asked, who sat at the edge of my bed when the nightmares came, who painted my mother from memory and gave the painting to me on a Tuesday without explanation. I know that the cottage on Marin Lake is mine, that the money is mine, that the letter is mine, that the cedar box on my desk smells like the person I spent 20 years trying to reconstruct from available materials, and that the reconstruction is ongoing and will probably never be complete, and that this is not a failure. This is just what it means to love someone you only had for a little while. I know that my mother was 31, and she planned for everything anyway. I try to plan for everything anyway. I think that is the inheritance that matters most. Not the cottage, not the money. The specific habit of sitting down at the table and thinking, what does the person I love need, and what can I do right now to make sure they have it? She sat down. She wrote the letter. She told the law firm to wait. I got the letter on my 18th birthday. I am still reading it.